Hi, I'm Eliot from Magoosh, and in this video, we're going to be thinking about the top 5 myths about the IELTS speaking section. So let's take a look at each one by one. The first myth is that you don't need to prepare for the speaking section. Some people believe that they've got the skills they need to just go into the test and speak and say what they need to say and get a really great score. That might be true for some people, yes, but the majority of people will really benefit from preparing. Each of your sections on the speaking test is going to be slightly different. There are 3 sections. Section 1, you have really basic sort of questions, kind of small talk questions. Part 2, you're going to have a monologue response. You have to give a short speech. And part 3, you've got more complicated, abstract questions you need to answer. The more you know about these 3 sections and the kind of answers they're looking for, the better you're going to do. So even if your English speaking skills are quite strong, do spend some time going through, reading about the speaking test, getting familiar with it so that you know what to expect for your IELTS interview. Definitely carve out a little bit of time before your test. If you've got a month to study, if you've got only a couple of weeks, spend some time on your speaking section and practice speaking questions. You do need to prepare, and it will help you and boost your score a little bit if you know what to expect and if you've done a little practice with the questions ahead of time. Another myth about the IELTS speaking section is that if you ask questions of the interviewer, it's going to hurt your score. Actually, that's not exactly true. There are some sections of the test where you're allowed to ask questions or you're allowed to ask for information, and there are other parts of the test where you shouldn't. Okay, so let's think about that a little bit. In section 1 of the test, the first part, you're going to have just really basic questions. As we said earlier in the video, these are just kind of small talk questions. In this part of the test, it's okay to ask for the interviewer to repeat a word for you if you didn't quite understand something. But you really shouldn't ask a lot of clarifying questions in this section. That could actually hurt your score. It makes it seem like you didn't understand the kind of basic questions that the interviewer was asking you. Okay, so if you can avoid it in part 1 of the test, don't ask questions. But if you need to have the interviewer repeat a word for you, that's fine. Part 2 of the test, you're not really supposed to ask questions at all, okay? This is the section where you have your monologue, okay? And you're going to get a question card or a piece of paper that gives you your question. You're supposed to have all the information you need from that question card, okay? So don't ask questions in part 2 of the test. Part 3, you're allowed to ask clarifying questions. It's okay. Maybe you would like to have the interviewer rephrase the question for you. They'll do that. If you say, I don't really understand, could you repeat that, or could you say that a different way? That's okay to do. You just don't want to do it every single time, right? If you genuinely did not understand a question, or you're not certain you understood the question, go ahead and ask for clarification. It won't hurt your score. It could only potentially hurt your score if you have to do it every single time and if you're repeatedly asking for clarification from the interviewer. So it is a myth that you can't ask questions, that it'll hurt your score to ask questions. Just keep in mind which sections of the test it's okay to ask for clarification and for what you're allowed to ask for during the speaking section. Another myth about the IELTS speaking test is that you are going to get a good score if you speak really, really fast, okay? Actually, that's not exactly true. There's a difference between speaking fast and speaking fluently, okay? To speak fast, you are saying many, many words in a short amount of time. Speaking fluently means that you don't have a lot of pauses when you speak. You don't have a lot of places where you're searching for words or you're not quite certain what you're supposed to say. What they're looking for on the IELTS speaking test is fluency, that you can say things in a way that doesn't seem like you're always searching for words or losing the words, or you're not quite certain how to say something. If you speak at a normal rate of speed and speak fluently, you can get a really great score. Actually, speaking fast ends up hurting a lot of people. When they're trying to speak really, really quickly, you say things the wrong way. This happens even when you're speaking your native language, right? If you're trying to speak super fast, you're going to make mistakes. Okay, so don't feel like you have to speak really, really fast on your speaking test. Focusing on fluency, focusing on connecting words together, connecting ideas together, and limiting the pauses, the places where you're searching for words, searching for a way to say something. That's going to help your score the most. Okay, so it's a myth. You don't have to speak fast to get a great score, but you do have to speak fluently. Another myth about the IELTS speaking section is that it is the most important section on the IELTS exam for the places you're applying to. In some cases, that could be true. You should check with the school or the organization you're applying to see whether they put any special emphasis on your speaking score. But for most institutions that accept IELTS, what they're looking for is an overall score at a certain level, right? Maybe a 7.5 or an 8. And then most places require that none of your 4 scores for speaking, writing, listening, reading fall below a certain level. So they may say you can have no scores below a 6.5 or a 7. So in most cases, it's not actually true that the speaking score is going to be your most important score. Most institutions will accept a range, and they will tell you clearly what that range is and what their expectations are. So the point here is to go to your institutions that you're applying to and understand their what they emphasize or what they find important from your IELTS score in terms of the section scores and your overall score. You got to know your targets for each one. Okay, so don't assume that the speaking section is going to be so much more important than the other sections. That may not be the case, and there's probably flexibility in what your institution expects. Okay, next, another myth about the IELTS speaking section is that you should spend time memorizing answers as a way of studying for that section of the test. People think about doing this because many of the questions are somewhat predictable for this section of the test. IELTS likes to ask you about your hometown, your family, the things you like to study in school. Those kinds of topics are very, very common. But there are many possible topics they could ask you about for even part 1 of the test where things are at least usually within some kind of general theme. They're usually not 100% predictable. And the problem is that if you have memorized answers, it's often very obvious to the person interviewing you that you aren't necessarily answering the question as directly as you should, or that you're using language that you have memorized before you took the test. It's much better to get practice with the kinds of questions you're going to answer on the test and not spend time memorizing what you want to say, but just practice talking about things like your school, your family, your hometown, places you've traveled, okay? So there's a difference there. Memorization means getting specific language that you plan to say on the test, whereas just studying those topics means that you get to practice the kinds of vocabulary, the kinds of sentences you will say using past tenses and present tenses and all kinds of things like that. That kind of study is much better than memorizing answers for the IELTS speaking test, especially part 1. So if you're looking for practice materials to work on speaking questions, especially for parts 1 and 2 of the test, we've got a fantastic resource for you. We have a PDF down in the description below that has hundreds of questions from the speaking test that you can use to practice on your own and to practice the kinds of questions, the kinds of topics that you're going to get in the speaking test. We also have a complete guide to the speaking section down there so that you can become familiar with the speaking test, all of its parts, and the different strategies you need to know to do really, really well on that part of the test. Also, if you like this video and you want some other study materials for IELTS exam, check out these videos over here and you're going to learn even more about the speaking section and other parts of the test that are going to help you do really great on your IELTS exam.